Okay, I'm going to answer my discussion board questions. I apologize for my scratchy voice. I'm just getting it back. The first question of how do these week's readings shape my thinking about the relationship between data, technology, and student success? I kind of have an accounting background. I'm a business background before I got into education. And then in my education, I really delved into curriculum and assessment. So for me, I've always been aware of the value of data. But what I learned this week in the readings, and I'll have to kind of skip through each one, I made notes. I thought an interesting thing was the difference between when we talk about data driven versus data informed. I would agree that I probably didn't think about the difference. And I can see the value in looking at data informed and the fact of the human component. And I think that human component tied into each one of our readings this week, whether we're talking about the human interactions in the Weber article, or we're looking at the Rennick or the Sloan article. Every one of those had this very strong human component of how we looked at stuff. A couple things that I got out of this was looking at how we can use, like, you can have data and you can have so much data, but if you don't use it the right way, it becomes worthless. And that led into multiple articles discussing the value of training staff and faculty how to use that. There's also the idea that, sorry, I'm scrolling through this. I know they mentioned Tableau. It's something I'm trying to learn how to do. And I'll address kind of my need to learn to use Tableau in one of my later questions. I always, where I teach now, is really big on the fact of interdisciplinary learning. But one of the things I got out of this, out of the Weber article, was this idea of that data needs to be shared across the organization. It shouldn't just be specific. So admissions has data, and our advising has data, and the registrar has data. But it's not really a good way that we all share it. Certainly not a good way to access it. So I think of that as being siloed. I said the same thing about classes, right? Degrees, concentrations. You know, the School of Business doesn't need to be siloed from the School of Liberal Arts. We all need to kind of work together. That goes back to what we talked about last week about looking at students as their whole journey, every little piece of it. And that goes into that central government governance. I think after the Canvas issue again, the idea of risk in tech is big. Nothing I think that's unusual. What I thought was good, and this ended in Weber, but we continued it, was the human interaction data on the technology. And I think that's going to stem from trying to look at students' behaviors. So to me, again, that bridges this idea of just looking at the quantifiable numbers, but looking at how they're doing it, how they're interacting with the data or the class. I think I got more out of again, I talked about data silo. I had another big comment. I know I talked about politics, getting into learning badges. Again, the third-party applications like Canvas. I think what I got out of that was probably bigger was the Rennick. I really enjoyed the article on Georgia State and this new GPS kind of advising platform and how they were able to utilize it. And I thought the fact that, you know, for every 1% you improve in retention, which is such a big deal where I'm working now, you know, what that generates in terms of income. And our focus or our request is that we keep looking at retaining our students. But I don't have any data to help me retain my students. So other than just giving them better grades or making them happy, I don't know, how do I retain my students? Well, this article to me is a little bit of a mind-blowing one, thinking like if we had some of this data, we could potentially have better retention. It does need to be a partnership between, you know, academic affairs, advising, faculty. I think it might involve faculty becoming more of the advisors. I would say that I feel like where I work now, students are left to kind of just pick their classes, and I think they get messed up. And I had an example of a senior that had to take like 6 classes a semester just in order to graduate and some summer school because her whole program got messed up and nobody caught it. I think that's a problem. I did think the micro grants were a really good idea. The summer melt I thought was really interesting because they get accepted, but then they don't show up. How are we communicating with them? And not just like, hey, we miss you, we can't wait to see you, but how are we really engaging with them? And I know they did that through their Admit Hub. And that was actually quite interactive. I haven't gotten, our students are very interactive. And then the other one that I thought was good out of here in this Admit Hub was the integration of better group tutoring. And then what I thought was interesting is that GPS advising, it was designed to empower the students, not create new layers of confusion. I thought that was so important. And we're giving them the data that they need to use to do better for themselves. So again, it's everybody that needs to be involved in using this. I thought the early grades in the student's major as a predictor of their success was just awesome. I thought that was a really interesting way to figure out who might succeed and who might not. But then there's also that gap, there's the middle child syndrome of people that had B's and C's that were maybe, they weren't the straight A's, so we didn't have to worry about them, or they weren't the failing students getting reached out to. What about the people in the middle? Is that our population that we're losing a lot? So I thought that was an interesting article. And the last one, for me, the reading was all over the place. I struggled in general because I know this was written prior to the latest administration, where DEI is now a bad word. But I think that this article really came out with a lot of information that we do everything based on what we think an average learner should be doing. But what I liked about this was taking this idea of data and looking again back at that human interaction, the student interaction with the class. And I'm at fault for this. I probably don't utilize enough analytics. How many times did the students access the class? I can get that. How much time did they spend? But then I thought it was interesting to think, who turned in their work early? Who's turning in their work at the end of the time? I use MyLab, like they mentioned in the article, but I also use McGraw-Hill Connect. And I can tell how long someone spent on the assignments, and I probably haven't dug into what's taken in the longest, where there's certain questions. So in my mind now, I think I want to go back and look at my data. We are in the midst of doing assessments for some classes, and I did a pre-test and a post-test. I'm not sure if those were the best options. I kind of like the idea that they did for the math class, where they looked at the first 2 quizzes. But I think that there's more data that I could get when I'm assessing my classes than just a pre and post test. And coming from an educational background, I can certainly understand that we're not looking at learning theories. So I do think I need to go back and look at that in terms of the pedagogy. Certainly as my school is looking at doing more online classes, how can we measure that students are engaged? So those were kind of some of the things I took away. I have a lot of notes on that last article that we read. And then obviously looking at the dashboard. I don't have a lot of access to data for my school. I just have it for my classes. That in itself is kind of a frustration. I know I'm probably going over. I guess I've kind of touched on where I experienced data analytics and visualization in my career. I think that is something that I need more of. And then for my current work setting that I've created so far to showcase the potential of technology, I think that's what we're trying to do right now when we went to a pre and post test, to have a better way to see how students improved. And originally I just wanted to see how they did in the beginning and the end, but I think I want to look at, I'm going to add some more stuff to that analysis now, where I can measure their actual grade in the class, not just how they did in the pre-test and the post-test, because sometimes they just answer the questions just to get done with them. But can I look at pre-post test and look at their actual test and then see their attendance, how often they were engaged in class, and see if that gives me some better data. But it's really kind of sparked my mind about stuff that I can do. All right. I know at least 4 minutes. I'm at 10. So I hope everybody had a great weekend. Thanks.